Early warm-up continued. Preparation for the 2025 Fantasy MLR season is in full swing. Last week, we broke down the confirmed signings on the Western Conference. This week, we talk about the Eastern Conference and how the teams look a little bit different heading into the next year and how that's going to play into the world of Fantasy MLR. The Fantasy Rucker Show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode 135 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, our community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of making fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. With you this week, Matt Yee, Ryan Yee here to continue our preseason warm-up when it comes to going through each and every single team in Major League Rugby, going through the confirmed signings with these squads. We did the Western Conference last week. We're continuing with the Eastern Conference this week. Maddie, there is a whole bunch of players that we need to get to in terms of these teams and how that's going to affect the world of Fantasy MLR for 2025. How's it going, man?
Not too bad. I mean, I'm up in the Great White North now, so yeah, I'm on the road a little bit, doing the show on the road. Vandy's on all daddy duties. It is what it is, but we're rolling here. We're rolling here. I'm looking forward to it. And, and we'll get into the news and notes, but this LA team, Ryan.
Yeah, you said it last week. They were getting you hot and bothered with some of the signings, especially in that back three area that you thought would make them a pretty lethal team coming into 2025. And I think there is a big announcement in terms of re-signing in the forward pack that I think that's got you pretty excited too. But we're going to go into that when we talk about the news and notes. We, again, also going to break down the Eastern Conference teams and talk about the confirmed signings, what their teams look like as of right now of the recording of this podcast when it comes to what their squad will look like, what that means for fantasy MLR, and our kind of reaction to that, because there was so much to catch up on during our holiday break, and we thought that breaking down each and every team. If you missed it last week, Western Conference teams, again, we broke down from LARFC or Rugby LA as they like to be called now, to the Utah Warriors, to the Houston Sabercats, the San Diego Legion, broke down Seattle Seawolves, broke down all of them. So again, check out that episode 134 for all that. Some other fantasy news though before we get into it, and it sucks that Vandy's not here right now because we got to bring it up. We've been having a long time fantasy football league, kind of where our passion for fantasy sports kind of stems from. Again, we have the Fantasy Ruckers League, which hey, we're doing pretty good. We passed and we're into the semifinals here, which is pretty solid for
Eagles
us.
Overseas.
There we go. So we are going to be, I think, matching up with either Nick or one of our other our analytics guru or the other side of the bracket. So we'll see. But hey, our fantasy expertise coming to fruition there. We're not just all talk. But again, going back to it, we've had a long time fantasy football league that's been the same guys or the same core group of guys for at least the past 10 years at the very least. And we had a long and strenuous season. For me, didn't go so hot. Pretty tough year when it came to that keeper league classic. But for you, Maddie, some pretty big upset news coming in there and also making a comeback after some lackadaisical maybe Thursday night football that had you a little bit more stressed than usual.
Yeah, I was the second seed, so not an upset, not the underdog here. I was supposed to win, but
who are you going up against?
I was going up against Vandy, but you're never the underdog when you're playing Vandy. But no, I was after Thursday night. That was a tough one. I think I had a couple guys goose egg it, but I think that got me kind of thinking of what Thursday night, Wednesday night, Tuesday night rugby, MLR rugby is going to look like. We're going to have some of those dramatic moments where, hey, you're going to think you're out of it on a Wednesday night or a Thursday night, thinking that you're fully out of your fantasy matchup. And I'm looking forward to that type of disappointment.
Yeah, the disappointment that fantasy typically brings. Yeah, it'll be interesting. But I guess on a lighter note, it does exemplify that anything is possible in fantasy sports. So even when we have these
There is.
MLR matches on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, may not go so well, but you might have some big time players that show up for you on Saturday or Sunday that can still lock up that dub for you. Maddie, I'll give you the floor one last time before we move on to some more rugby stuff. Do you have anything to say to Vandy as you have the mic here? I
Uh,
mean, it always
he's
feels
gone through
good
enough.
to.
I think he's gone through enough. I went through my shared disappointment on Thursday, and then Sunday was a good day for me, and he had to go through Sunday and Monday disappointed. So he's gone through enough. You'll get through a big guy. I'm gonna go win this chip for you.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, the disappointment never ends when it comes to fantasy because football is going to be
Oh,
dwindling down here as the playoffs are kind of circulating. And then in, I guess, under 2 months' time, we'll have fantasy MLR kind of in full swing here that will fill in that void coming up. But yeah, again, just making us even more and more excited for this upcoming fantasy MLR season. So thought I'd give you the stage there, Maddie, because it is a big time dub there. You got a final with a lot of money on the line
no
for sure.
celebrating until another week out. So we'll
There
see.
you go. All right. Well, before we get into our first segment of the show, we say it every single week. Make sure you're following us at the Fantasy Ruckers. Like we mentioned, we're under 2 months away from the start of the Fantasy MLR season. We're going to open up registration in the new year, right at the beginning of 2025, for people who are interested in partaking in Fantasy MLR, whether you did that last year, whether you're a newcomer, whether you want to just participate in our weekly challenge, whether you want to join in a league. We might even have money leagues this year, which will be interesting to put a little bit more stake on or what's at stake when it comes to some of the leagues that are playing, which will be a whole lot of fun. The way you're going to find out about all that information is at the Fantasy Ruckers on X, on Instagram, on Facebook. Like, subscribe on YouTube to follow this podcast each and every week where we come out with the latest information. We talk a little bit about the MLR, what it relates to fantasy MLR. It helps us a whole lot when you guys do that and show us some love there. Join our Discord, great community down below. It is our main platform to communicate throughout the fantasy MLR season. And we also have a lot of fun people over there that love to chat Major League Rugby, plus just rugby going on in the world, which is a whole lot of fun. And hey, make sure you also check out the fantasyruckers.com, our official platform for fantasy MLR here on the Fantasy Ruckers show. I actually had a meeting with our website guru, Alistair Kirschpool, the great mind behind our website. And we started talking a little bit about how even because he is also the host of the Glorious Rugby podcast, a big Old Glory DC fan over there. He still to this day uses our website, or his, I guess, brainchild, to make sure
His
that he's up to
website.
date on all the stats. So yeah, it's a little bit more useful than just fantasy MLR. It has a little bit of everything. So hey, you'll want to check that out. But hey, you ready to talk about some latest news over the past week, Maddie?
Let's do it.
News dump.
All right, and we start off the show with our news dump, where we go over the latest happenings from around the league from over the past week since the recording of our last episode 134. Again, I think signings just continue to come in for each and every team. I think it'll
Well,
continue
Old
to
Glory
happen.
DC's got one per day until Christmas. So I'm
Yeah.
trying to figure.
Well,
I
they
just thought yesterday that they must have it's been getting bigger and bigger every day. So
and
Christmas has got to be a big one.
there you go. Well, in fairness, they did provide some warning to that it's going to be like what, the 20 days of Christmas or whatever they do, and they've been
It's like
releasing
a
the past
chocolate. It's one
couple
of
have
those
been.
chocolate things.
There
You
you go.
know?
Yeah, the advent calendars there, an Old Glory
Yeah.
DC player advent calendar.
Exactly.
But we'll get into their signings here when we talk about the Eastern Conference. We're going to just basically catch up on the Western Conference teams because, again, we broke down those teams last week in our first part of our early fantasy season MLR warm up when it came to breaking down these teams. Check that out for all the other signings that happened and what we think about that. But there were some that happened over the course of the past week that we need to touch on. Why don't we get it out of the way, Maddie? Because you're pumped about them. Rugby LA doing big time things. I guess
Yeah,
we'll
it's gonna
save
be
the best for
sweet.
last. We'll save the best for last, but they did announce a whole string of front row players returning. Lincoln C, Alessandro Heaney, Dane Zander, and I think the most fantasy relevant, Ben Strang. We'll see how relevant he will be this year with the addition of
Ben Sugars.
Ben Sugars coming in.
Ben
Again, he was a
squared.
pretty I think Ben squared. There you go. The Ben squared hooker tandem there. Ben Strang about 118 fantasy points, I think, last year. Really the de facto starting nine or starting hooker, I should say, for the LA RFC squad, finishing in a decent number there when it came to fourth in all of fantasy. And again, a large portion of that. So we'll see how much of Ben Sugars cuts into that. And again, 119.8 fantasy points for Ben Strang. Other guys that are returning, Matt Heaton, back row player, is returning for the 2025 season. And then the big one, Semi Kunatani, is returning for the 2025 year. He is the guy that is within our top three of all fantasy players from the past season.
Yeah.
214.5 fantasy points, our top back row scorer in all of fantasy by quite a large margin. The next being Frank Lahore and Sam Tuifua at around the 160, 150 point mark. Semi Kuntani, the only back row player to surpass the 200 point mark. This is a big time signing for Rugby LA, and should be a big one for fantasy managers out there.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it last week. Like the forward pack is where we had a lot of questions because nothing were announced, and the big question was, is Semi Kunatani going to be coming back? And we've had that answered for us. Semi Kunatani is coming back, along with guys and imports like Ben Houston, returning guys like Matt Heaton. Um, this is going to be a good squad. I mean, it looks like that there's a lot of excitement that can definitely be around the squad. Their back line is definitely planning to be superb. And now their back row is planning on being very superb. So yeah, I'm excited to see who else they add to this team.
Semi Kunatani, is he the top back row player right now on the board? I mean, how can't he
Yeah.
be? I mean, 214.8 fantasy points last year. Really, he's the guy that I think will be coming off the board in the first round. We know last year there was a lot of hype with Riekert Hatting coming in this season. I think he's going to kind of surpass that and be the guy that people are gunning for if you're going to change or if you're going to go with that forward stack in that first round here. I think Semi Kunatani is that name that comes off the board.
Yeah. If we know anything, he'll probably be off the board in the first round and then disappoint us all.
There you go. We'll see, and we'll see where he ends up in our top five back row rankings. But I don't think there's going to be a lot of spoilers there. With now that we know that he's returning, you touched on it, Maddie. A couple new signings and incomers for Rugby LA. You mentioned Ben Houston. Robert Mappa is also coming in, back three player. Any thoughts on those signings here? Depth signings, guys that will make an impact. What are your thoughts?
I think Ben Houston will probably have an impact here. And again, it really depends. Like it'll be tough to crack that back three room now, for sure. But when you're looking at the back row right now, they're thin. I'm sure they've got more signings on the way, but he looks like you bring in an international guy, he's going to get playing time with the pedigree that he has.
Yeah, Ben Houston, a guy that just pulling up his past here, is a guy that has experience, and really is going to try to vie for kind of some of those top spots. Robert Mappa is a guy that has some overseas experience as well. He played with his brothers actually in Brisbane, and played with the Storm and their U21 side in 2024. So a young guy looking to make a name for himself. We'll see
Lead guy.
where that ends up there. And we'll go from there. Ben Houston, Australian, played with the Galloping Greens, where he captained the side for their first Shoot Shield victory in almost 20 years in 2023. That according to James Dealey of MLR Stats. So two guys with international experience. We'll see how they make an impact there. All right, moving on to some of the other Western Conference teams that made signings here. Seattle Seawolves signing their first round draft pick, Calvin Liulamaga.
Sure.
I think. There we go. Center, 2024 again, first round pick. He's there for the 2025 year. Again, I think we know that center room for the Seattle Seawolves. They have not been announced yet. Surprisingly enough, for the Seattle Seawolves, Liulamaga is the first center that they've officially announced as a player that's coming into that center room. I'd expect that those other big names that we talked about last episode, the likes of Dan Creel, the likes of Devon Rousseau, are all guys that will be returning. Again, that's just a hunch that we have, and just the consistency that the Seattle Seawolves have brought. So I can't see that the Calvin is going to have any real significant impact on fantasy this year. But again, just a young guy that's coming into the league, and we'll see. Ceiling's high.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Not much else to say there.
All right, Houston SaberCats also announcing a couple signings here. Max Schumacher is re-signing for the 2025 year. Fly half, who was one of those top-level draft picks a couple years back. We've seen him on the field, kind of that depth piece last year with obviously Davy Kutzer and AJ Alatimu being in those kind of marquee spots. Jay Renton joins a pretty jam-packed scrum half room for the Houston SaberCats, who now have Andre Warner and Juan D. Oliver. Now you add Jay Renton to the mix. That's going to be interesting. Seth Smith, the youngest player, was it to score a try or is it two tries in a match, I believe,
I'm like
for
that.
in entire Major League Rugby. He joins, re-signs with the Houston SaberCats. He looks like to be the de facto backup to Pita Ane Asu. And then we have two new signing, or excuse me, one signing that's joining that front pack room. Michael Scott is joining for 2025. So thoughts on those signings there, Maddie?
Yeah, I think Seth Smith's great. I'm hoping that he's a consistent backup there because he's going to be a genuine streaming option with the way that he plays and with the way the Houston SaberCats play. But I think the biggest one for me is that Jay Renton signing. It makes absolutely no sense, and it's not great fantasy wise. Until I'm proven otherwise, I'm staying away from this scrum half room because simply what are you going to do? We talked about last week handcuffing two guys. Now what are you going to handcuff three guys? Like all
Yeah.
three of those guys are quality nines. I know we didn't see Jay Renton that much last year, but um, we're going to see him even less, and you're just going to have more questions with this scrum half room.
Yeah, just kind of muddies the waters a little bit. So
Yeah,
as of right now, we talked about it last week, quickly here. Two of the top scrum half rooms in all of Major League Rugby is in that Western Conference. You have, yes, the Houston SaberCats, who we just mentioned, Andre Warner, Juan D. Oliver, now Jay Renton, and you compare that to the San Diego Legion, who have Connor Tupai and the return of Richard Judd. I guess you'd probably be siding more with the Richard Judd, Connor Tupai side of things right now as the waters get even more muddy here for this Houston SaberCats, because I know you're a big Andre Warner guy.
yeah, big Andre Winter guy, but I think these ones are going to be tough, especially when you don't have a clear starter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Last thing, God, we always like to mention and give congratulations to some guys that decide to hang up the boots here. And Greg Peterson has officially announced his retirement. A guy, a second row for the San Diego Legion, a lock who, from fantasy sides of things, was very, very productive. One of the most productive second row players in fantasy MLR when it came to that lock position. He was able to rack up a whole bunch of points there. 80.1 finishes within the top 10 of all second row players last year, just behind Malcolm May and ahead of James Scott. So Greg Peterson not returning next year, which I think some people may have had the feeling that that was going to happen with just kind of how San Diego was one of those teams that was announcing a whole bunch of names, and they've packed that second row room with guys like James Rivers, Charlie Hewitt, J. Tuivasa, and Brandon Harvey, who all will announce retirement. You were kind of waiting for the Greg Peterson announcement, and here you got it. Peterson, a longtime Eagle, hanging up the boots there, last playing for the Legion.
Rat's on a great career, and he gets to finish it off coming back to the San Diego Legion, back to his homeland.
All right. Well, hey, that is the news and notes, the latest from the past week. But obviously, there's a whole bunch that happened over the course of the past week when it comes to our Eastern Conference team. So let's continue our preseason warm up.
Preseason warm up.
All right, so let's talk about our preseason warm-up here, and we're continuing with our Eastern Conference. Again, check out episode 135. If you missed our Western Conference breakdown, we go into depth on each of these teams, the confirmed signings, where they came from, what this looks like in terms of fantasy value moving forward for the 2025 year. We went over the Legion, the Warriors, Rugby LA, the Seattle Seawolves, and the Houston SaberCats last episode. You add in those signings that we just talked about in the news and notes, you should get a pretty clear picture in terms of what we are looking like so far when it comes to the 2025 Major League Rugby season for fantasy MLR and how these look. And again, signings will continue to come in. We'll keep on updating people, but hey, we are starting to get a clear picture as we are under 2 months away to the start of the Major League Rugby season. I think, Maddie, we'll start off here because there's not much to talk about when it comes to this team, and we'll continue to wait and see. And I think I just want to get it out of the way right off the start, and that is talking a little bit about Anthem Rugby Carolina. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation. It was funny because this was probably the earliest signings that we probably knew about.
Yeah.
And since then, haven't really heard about anything. Really, their last, if you scroll through their social media channels, outside of the draft picks that they had for the upcoming year, which is exciting because they do have a lot of exciting guys coming in, like Eric Storty, like Neil Trainer coming into those teams. Their last kind of move was acquiring the service rights of Junior Goffa, who we know was very, very successful in the 2024 fantasy season. And then since then, it's kind of been silence. We did see that
Uh-oh.
on the USA
Uh-oh.
Rugby. They announced that Mitch Wilson, when he said he was departing the Free Jacks, they listed his club as the Anthem.
You know what
We
happens
know,
when clubs go silent, Ryan?
yeah, I know it gets a little scary, but they do have the backing of World Rugby. We know that, so
Well,
I'm not too concerned, but we'll see. We'll cross that bridge if that happens. I know we've been here before, right? It sounds very similar, but
no, it's not happening.
nonetheless, we know that the dispersal draft, they selected Sam Gala. Still not confirmed about that. We did have Jake Turnbull on the show not too long ago. You can check out that episode on our YouTube page, wherever you get podcasts. He goes into depth on the excitement heading into this year, their goals for this season. It sounded like they're going to be good to go. I think Anthem maybe are just crossing their T's and dotting their I's when it comes to these signings. They may be the last team to do it, but nonetheless, I am confident that the Anthem Rugby Carolina squad will be competing here in the 2025 year. I know there's always pause now with people when it comes to the lack of communication, especially as we get closer and closer to the season. But again, from Jake Turnbull himself, there is a lot of excitement around this team. Again, all we know is that Jake Turnbull's returning, Junior Goff is returning, and we didn't even see an announcement from Jake Turnbull. We just heard it from himself that he was going to be returning. And again, unconfirmed Mitch Wilson and Sam Gala. So I don't know where else to go with this team. We'll just have to wait and see. Again, Stefan Kramp
No.
and Sion Latu are departures we do know of because they have announced that they will be joining other teams.
Yeah, they'll be fine. I mean, again, they got the back of the World Rugby. I was just kidding there. I'm sure they'll announce. I'm sure that they're also kind of seeing where guys are being signed with other squads to see what pool of players are going to be available for them to pick up and potentially acquire rights to or take people on loan. So yeah, it'll come out. I'm hoping that doesn't take too long, and I hope it doesn't impact fantasy, but it is what it is.
It is what it is. So we'll see. Again, wait and see approach, kind of the holding pattern when it comes to this Anthem Rugby Carolina squad. All right, let's go to our first official then Eastern Conference team, and we'll start with a team that has a whole bunch of returning players. Old Glory DC has been kind of slowly punching out their names when it comes to, especially this month of December, on terms of guys that are going to be returning this year. We heard early signings when it came to Stephen Hughes, center from overseas, coming to the Old Glory DC squad. Jason Emery announcing that he signed with the Old Glory DC squad that we kind of had questions about in terms of where his importance on. But when it comes to the announcement of these returnees, those signings kind of make maybe a little bit more sense as we continue to break down this team. So let's start with it from the top. Front row for this Old Glory DC side, Quentin Newcomer's coming back, Koi Nelligan, Martin Vaca, and Callie Martinez, friend of the show, is coming back to that front row room for the Old Glory DC side. You'd expect, or at least I'd expect, Martin Vaca to be once again that guy that is kind of leading that pack, and I think you can have a lot of assurance that he will probably be the first Old Glory DC front row player that comes off the board in fantasy drafts here for the upcoming year.
Yeah, for sure. I think Vaca is the clear number one there at the hooker position. So no surprise there.
Yeah, 93.6 fantasy points. Had a little bit of time with injury there between rounds 15 and 17. Had that big time showing in the second week of the season, 22.8 fantasy points where he scored 3 tries. Again, Old Glory DC, I think, was a team last year that kind of maybe fell short of what their goals were. And they'll look to kind of bounce back with that. And Martin Vaca will be a big part of that. Moving on to the second row position, 3 returnees that have been officially announced here for their locks. Tavita Nakali, Bill Whiteside, and Charlie Overton all coming back for Old Glory DC. Anything that you see of interest there?
Nakali, I think, will always be a good streamer in this league, but yeah, I think you're hoping for potentially a little bit more quality here and a clear number one in that second row.
The one guy missing right now, Rob Harley, was a staple starter for the
Yeah.
Old Glory DC side. Haven't heard anything from him, but Tavita Nakali was their top fantasy lock scorer and only played, like, did not make his first appearance until round five. Didn't even make his first start until round eight in a game where he scored 18 and a half fantasy points. I think Nakali, now looking at his numbers here, might be a kind of second row sleeper heading into this year. So we'll see. Keep an eye out for any additions that they'll have in their second row room. We kind of start to thin out here as we now go to some of these other positions. So we go into the back row. Only two announcements here so far for Old Glory DC. Colin Gross and Brady Daniel are the two guys that they've officially announced here for Old Glory DC heading into 2025.
Yeah, I mean, Colin Gross, you love to see. I think it would be interesting to see whether he steps into that second row room or he starts getting solidified as a back row starter. I think he's definitely going to be a guy to watch and a guy that's probably going to be taken in this draft, depending on who they fill out around these guys. Because if Colin Gross, every time he kind of started a game, he was always a guy that you wanted on your squad and you wanted starting in your lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, and then if you look at Brady Daniel, brother of Corey Daniel, kind of was the took the back seat, only 33 fantasy points, but you couldn't have said it better there, Maddie. In his stretch where he started the 6 games in a row between round 4 and round 13, in the five that he did 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9, almost double-digit performances in every single time. So again, I think we've been very high on Colin Gross. I'm pretty sure I had him on my top 5 second rows last year because he had that eligibility, if I recall correctly. He's a guy that's had a lot of ceiling, a lot of excitement. So we'll see whether he steps on the field. Again, we haven't heard anything about Lataro Bavaro, haven't heard anything about Jama, and we'll have to see. And Corey Daniel, haven't heard anything either there. So we'll have to wait and see in terms of what comes out from this back row room. You can assure that there is going to be more signings coming through here. All right, scrum half position. Connor Buckley is the lone scrum half right now that we have at Old Glory DC. I'm almost positive that that Danny Tuzitala is not returning. I believe if I kind of go back into the news that we've covered in the past.
Yep.
So it's Connor Buckley and no one else. And honestly, might be one of, just based on opportunity here, and we know we're big on that on this show.
Well,
When it comes to strategy, Connor Buckley might actually be a very, very viable, if not a top option when it comes to the scrum half
no,
position.
I mean, I'm projecting. I think he's going to be in the top five. Like he's going to be one of the top, especially if it continues that he's the lone starter. Every time he started, he was the guy. And he honestly put up a lot of points. He had a lot of, I mean, tries as well. I think Connor Buckley's going to have a great year this year, and I think he's going to have a great year fantasy wise too.
Yeah, he was kind of the shock of the year because I think what did Danny Tusitala get? Kind of, he was one of our busts of the year. He was like, I think on average ADP, like drafted in the first like 4 rounds, I think.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly. Connor Buckley kind of stepped into the 9 position and really kind of solidified that, especially towards the end of the year. Didn't really necessarily, his biggest performance was 15.9 fantasy points when he scored 2 tries in round 16. His other next highest was round 8. So again, doesn't have obviously that same explosiveness that you maybe expect from guys like Connor Tupai, or the consistency maybe that you got from Andre Warner. But we'll have to see. Again, he's right now the only guy. So the only other guys that were kind of options there for Old Glory was Ethan McVeigh, who kind of started a lot of the middle portion of the season. Again, kind of had that same type of output. So we'll see. Again, a wait and see type deal here. If Connor Buckley is kind of that marquee guy, we'll wait and see. And I think that top 5 prediction is a solid one if that's the case. Moving on to the fly half position, Jason Robertson announced that he will be returning to the squad for the 2025 year. This is exciting because Jason Robertson is a guy that is very, very fantasy relevant. Is a guy that has been successful, 168.7 fantasy points last year. His consistency from the boot is always impressive when it comes to fantasy output. Usually you can count on him getting at least double-digit fantasy points. Maybe isn't explosive when it comes to the try scoring or the meters gained that you might get from some of these other more athletic fly halves in the league, or
Whoa.
more the playmakers. But Jason Robertson, though, does provide value and consistency. Good to see that he's coming back to the league as well.
Yeah, good to see. And I think this clears up any questions of Jason Emery's spot on this squad as well.
Mhm.
As you get to the centers, I think You look at Jason Emery as kind of a distributing center, and let's see what they do with that because that could be really lethal for that back line, especially once we start getting into the back three and what this back three looks like.
Yeah. So let's jump on over to the centers here. Again, it is pretty clear, kind of what we alluded to at the beginning that the center room, I think, is going to be the biggest question with this team. Because you had last year, you had guys, again, not that there was any play there that was necessarily solid, but you had guys like William Talataina,
Uh,
Thomas Boney, and Thomas Inciarte, all guys who scored above 100 fantasy points, not necessarily were the most impressive last year. So maybe there's a change in the works when it comes to trying to figure out this center pairing here that they have. As of right now, like you mentioned, Matthew, it is Jason Emery and then Stephen Hughes, a guy that they announced the signing of back in October, who brings overseas experience. Welsh center is a guy that has again over 100 appearances in the Pro 14 league, and should provide kind of maybe a fresh look at that center room here for the squad.
yeah, I think Stephen Hughes is definitely got to look at. I think I'll actually say that Jason Emery is probably a guy that you shouldn't be looking at in the fantasy circles. I just don't think that his style of play anymore really translates. And honestly, I'm hoping that Old Glory DC utilizes him as the distributing center because I think that's where he really shines. And we've seen that skill at 10, we've seen that skill at 12. So I hope that he shines as distributing center to really open it up for this back three.
Yeah, so we'll see. Again, only two names there. I expect that to get a little bit longer here as the weeks go on. But right now, at least from a fantasy sense, it looks like Stephen Hughes is the guy to have when it comes to this Old Glory DC squad. All right, this is probably the section that Old Glory DC fans and fantasy managers are most excited for because we have been getting a trickle down of what these names are going to look like. We started off with Declan O'Loughlin. We started off with John Rizzo. We got John Powers. We got Perry Humphreys. And then most recently, the announcement of the two big names here that I think you were very excited for last year too, Maddie. Axel Muller and Damian Hoyland announcing that they are returning to Old Glory DC, which is very exciting for this squad because we saw what these two guys can do. They will be the starters for this team,
Yeah.
and they will be fantasy relevant as well.
Yeah, I mean, the last three names you said, Perry Humphreys, Axel Muller, Damian Hoyland, I think that's their back three right there, right? So we've also seen Damian Hoyland go in at 13. I don't think he'll be needed at 13. So he can play at his natural position of 15, which is awesome. And I think that's where he scored most of his fantasy points. The big guy, I think everybody's got to be excited about. And when I say big, I mean huge. Axel Muller, we saw the plays that he made last year. He's going to continue to make those plays, and he's going to do that at a high level for this team. He should be high on everybody's fantasy radar.
Yeah, and basically locked up their top four fantasy scorers of last season. So Damian Hoyland, 126.9 was their leading back three scorer. 117.5 for Axel Miller. Perry Humphreys, 81.5. That really actually kind of took off towards the tail end of the year and being really, really fantasy relevant. And then John Rizzo, 79.2 was the kind of solid streamer there. If you needed kind of a spot start, if you did see him in that starting 15. So, I mean, it's slowly taking shape, Maddie. You go down this list of names. A lot of them, I know there aren't like the flashy signings like Rugby LA that we talked about. Maybe not like Utah, who are coming in and trying to revamp the squad. A lot of this is returning guys with the additions of Stephen Hughes and Jason Emery up to this point. What are your overall kind of thoughts and opinions on Old Glory DC? Do you get a sense of lacklusterness, or do you think, coming back and trying to go again with some of these marquee guys like Axel Muller, Damian Hoyland, and Jason Robertson is going to be good enough for them?
I mean, hasn't been good enough for the past few years, but I guess
That's
it might be
true.
good enough next year.
We'll see. We'll see. So again, watch out for some more guys coming through. But it does seem like though that Old Glory DC is going to try to run it back with a large part of their core. I can't expect any massive signings are coming through outside of Stephen Hughes coming in, but we'll have to wait and see. All right, let's move on to the NOLA Gold. This one, again, not as many announcements. I think a lot of their returning announcements are going to be coming down in the next few days or next few weeks. They did just most recently announce a big portion of their front row room,
Basically,
just
all
like
of
the
them.
start of this returning the recording of this podcast. And they basically have announced a lot of their new signings or MLR signings from across the league, and now they're going to try to fill that out with guys that probably were on their squad last year outside of the guys that they've announced they've already released. So let's go through it from the front row position. The guys that have announced they're returning: Bart Vermeulen, Jared Adams, Isaac Salmon, Doc E-Ray, Matt Harmon, all guys that have been okay. Others more than others in terms of fantasy relevance. Like probably Matt Harmon and Jared Adams are probably guys that have been streamers in the past for you. But I think from the front row room, guys that people will be very excited about is the additions of Paul Mullen and more importantly, Big Joe Tofete, and add Tyler Matcham in part of that. But I think Big Joe is a guy that people will look and see here, will be the main guy here for this front row room.
Yeah, and I think NOLA Gold hookers have always been kind of it's been a hit and miss. They
Hmm.
constantly were rotating. I mean, with Augusto Bohm and Pat O'Toole,
Yep.
um, but now we've got kind of a lock in here. Like Big Joe is going to be the starter for this team, and we've seen the way he plays. He's going to be a big addition for that front row.
Yeah, so we should see from their front row room last year. You mentioned in Matt, Augusto Bohm was kind of the leading point scorer, just sparse and in and out appearances at that hooker position with 46.5 fantasy points. Jared Adams, cool to see him to kind of return. He might be a streamer for you because even at that front row position was able to score fantasy points for you. But I think, yeah, the biggest news here is Big Joe and a big reliance on there. This is where then we very taper out in terms of what we know about this team. Second row, back row, we have Caden DeGuide is joining this NOLA lock room. I don't know much about him. We'll
From the
see what
Highlanders,
he's able to bring. I guess you can at least start with that experience there from overseas, Maddie.
well, Vancouver Highlanders.
Oh, oh,
So
there you
not
go.
not not the Highlanders of New Zealand. So he's coming from the Vancouver Highlanders. I mean, you know that at least he's got good coaching over there. I mean, he's been a talented player coming through. So I'll be excited to see him finally get a shot in the MLR.
6'8", six
Yeah, big
eight. So at the
boy.
very least, he fills out that requirement there for your second row position. A trade that the NOLA Gold took part in. They acquired Tapo Maafu Afungia, a guy that very fantasy relevant. I mean, he's a guy that last year
Inconsistent though.
played and
Inconsistent. Yeah,
sure,
like
and
just hard to trust him, to be fair.
92.8 fantasy points. He would score as low as -1.9 to as many as 17.2. So that kind of that big range of outcomes for there. Again, with the San Diego Legion last year, might find himself in a more of a consistent position here with Nola Gold, but we'll have to see again. Still a fantasy relevant player. Probably bordering that streamer versus kind of late end back row player at the end of drafts that you might be able to throw in here. But again, not knowing much. Again, we don't know about any other of the NOLA Gold back row guys that are coming through that have been so powerful for this NOLA Gold team, including the likes of what am I missing here?
No, you're just really hoping for that
Jonah
Jordan Mullen
Moe.
outfit.
Yeah, exactly. We're waiting for Jonah, one of the top scoring, 150.9. OJ Noah departing this team. So we're not too sure about this back row room as of right now. We haven't heard anything from Jonah Moe. Scrum half position, we know nothing outside the fact that I don't think Luke Campbell is returning. If I believe, right? Is that something that we've heard of, or I don't know? Am I spitting? Am I getting that mixed up with Nick McCarthy? I could be getting that mixed up with
Pretty
Nick
sure again
McCarthy.
that mixed up with Nick McCarthy, but I haven't
Okay,
heard anything here on the scrum half position. I haven't heard anything related to Luke Campbell either. But we're also
so
not the people to ask.
yeah, so don't know there. So we're gonna wait and see for the scrum half position. The fly half position is probably the one that has the most storylines into this one. Obviously we know the departure of Rodney Iona, who now joins the Seattle Seawolves. Luke Carty though from the Chicago Hounds. We know how high we are on him on this
Well,
show
I did
in
not say
terms
I
of
was high on Luke Carty. I said he can get the job done, and
we know
everybody
how
seemed to hate him.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think I have him on my top five fly halves. I think I probably
I
did,
don't
but just
know,
go
but
how
that
high.
was a mistake. But
Yeah,
the
we'll
look,
see. We'll see what
he's
he is with
fine.
no
He's
gold.
fine. Is he fantasy relevant even if he starts? No. But will you need a 10 at some point? Yes, and you're gonna have Luke Carty. So even if you hate him, you're gonna have to pick him up.
I mean, out of the four times he started at 10 last year for the Chicago Hounds,
And mind
uh,
you, Chicago Hounds suck. And
yes,
Nola Gold might also suck.
he was pretty adequate from the fly half
That's what I
position.
said.
12
That's
and a half,
adequate is the
9.4,
exact word that I'm saying. He
9.4.
gets the
There you
job
go.
done.
Yeah, 17.3, four penalty kicks in round 16, four conversions in round 17, four conversions in round 18. Um,
Yeah, when
Not
you
too bad.
start just talking about his conversions, that's when you know he's been just incredibly adequate. All right,
Yeah.
centers.
All right. Centers, Nikolai Foliaki and Isaac
Yeah,
Taramaki,
this
two guys
is
that are joining.
yeah, you didn't say his name right, but Isaac Tutamaki, I think he said Taranaki or something like that. Um, but no, so I have a picture with this guy when he came to Vancouver Sevens.
Oh, okay.
He's dope. He's sweet. He's an All Black Sevens guy. It's so great to see him coming over to this NOLA Gold team. I'm excited to see him play. I think he's going to be great fantasy wise. I'm a little biased, but he's a skilled and talented Sevens player. He plays 15s in the NBC Bunnies Cup. He'll be able to translate that pretty well.
Yeah. So we'll see. Any knowledge of Nikolai Foliaki?
No clue. Was too excited looking at Isaac Titamaki.
There you go.
But that's a cool
Tamaki.
combo. That's a cool combo. Cool
It is a
combi. Cool combi
cool,
of Foliaki with
cool
Tamaki.
combo. Well, New Zealand-born Tongan center.
You like that.
Yeah, we'll see.
We
That
like that. That's a good
provides.
recipe for success right there.
So a two, a Maori back line, center line, I should say. There
Yeah.
that got people pretty excited. All right, going to the back three again. Don't know much. New signings here: Cooper Coates, Xavier
Mm.
Migno,
There you go. G's a
Xavier
little bit
Mignon.
silent.
And Kayla McEnany is obviously the big one here, coming from the Utah Warriors. Utah announcing the departure there. Kayla McEnany stepping in. It's a fresh look. It's a fresh look for a team that, we've always been excited for this NOLA Gold back
Yeah.
three, I think. They had guys like Jordan Jackson Hope, Ed Fido,
I'm
Taniela
I'm,
Filamoni.
I'm pretty confident Fido's coming back. He
Okay.
lives there. He posts videos about. I mean, I think he signed a multi-year deal anyways. But yeah, I mean, he posts videos there about like his off season and stuff like that. So I'm assuming Fido's back.
Is that the next
Philemone.
level of work that you're doing right now? You
Yeah, I
already.
don't know. I don't know. I just saw it. It came up on my feed and I watched it. I think Philemone, he signed somewhere, didn't he? I thought he went to Super Rugby. I think he went to Super Rugby as like a training squad player. I think for the Chiefs or something.
Yes.
Uh,
The NOLA Gold for Super Rugby. Da 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 da. Will join Pacifica? Pacifica.
Yeah, Moana Pacifica. So he's joining Moana Pacifica as a training squad player. Great for him. We'd love to see that. We know that he has probably no goals with other rights if he chooses to come back because he did sign that multi-year deal. So it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, I mean, Cooper Coates, a Canada Sevens guy. He's pretty good. And then Caleb McNamee, he's going to be the big one here, which I think we're going to see fantasy relevance here. He's going to be the starting 15 and the lock for this team.
Um, I guess the pairing of Kyle Mackin and Ed Fido, I mean that'd be pretty fun to watch, right? I mean, we know what Ed Fido can do. We know what Kayla McEnany can do. Know
Well,
Nola Gold's
yeah.
expansive play. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, we just hope that they can get the ball out there.
Yeah, I don't think we can create a picture for this NOLA Gold team as well as we were able to do for Oakwood DC. I think it's still to be determined.
Yeah.
Again, there's a lot of change. They've always underwhelmed so far when it comes to their performances in the league. So we'll have to wait and see. Again, the first wave of front row signings that were returning came in literally just before the recording of this podcast. So I'd expect in the coming days, coming weeks, we're going to get more of those returning players. That'll probably include guys like Ed Fido. We'll find out whether or not Luke Campbell is returning and some of these other guys with the NOLA Gold.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, let's move on over now to the Miami Sharks. This is one that we actually do have quite a bit of a picture of what this team is going to look like. And
South America.
South American signings coming in, South American returning players coming in, signing South American guys from the dispersal draft while adding a few others. I mean, this Miami Sharks team, I think, is looking pretty solid. We'll go down the front row list to start off with, Maddie. Very deep room here, busy room. Thomas Beckerman, they acquired him in the dispersal draft. They added to the returnees of Sean McNulty, Kirby Myhill, Alec McDonald, Jonas Petrokopoulos, Seta Vol, Alex Tucci, and then the signing of Isaac Ballas, hooker for this squad. Yeah, just a deep room that I think we'll get a better picture going into the season with as more games are played. But you probably say Sean McNulty maybe or Kirby Myhill are the guys that are going to be the guys you're looking. But the X factor here is Isaac Ballas at the hooker position there to see what he does.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, we saw Kirby Mile. We thought that he was going to have a big impact, but not really. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see who's actually leading the soccer room.
Sean McNulty ended up being the top guy there, 83 and a half fantasy points. Again, this was a Miami Sharks set piece, though, that you didn't really get a big chunk of it, throughout the year in terms of production that led to the successful hooker position. Again, Kirby Myhill, I can't remember if it was a year due to injury, but only made 6 starts last year. Missed a big chunk of the season between round 7 and 13. So again, that might be going into it. So again, just questions there with regards to who's going to kind of solidify that role between Sean McNulty, Kirby Myhill, and then the incoming Isaac Ballas coming in there. All right, second row position, Rick Rose returning, kind of the USA Eagle high ceiling guy that people have had a lot of hope for, and he joins two. I think they're both Argentinian, right?
I'm sure they are.
Two massive Argentinians. One of them being no, sorry. One of them being Federico Gutierrez, and then Mauro Rebusoni. Rebusoni? I feel like I'm butchering that. But
Boy,
two
you
big
sure
guys
do
that
butcher a
will
lot of names from different countries.
that will be joining here this Miami Sharks team, kind of the staple of what they have been doing in terms of where they're funneling their talent from.
Yeah, and I mean, look, like I think Federico is going to be the guy here. Like he has experience with the Jaguares, experience with Argentina. Um, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how he goes on. I think he's going to be a guy that we're going to have to take a look at in this second row room as one of the top second rows in this league.
Yeah, and then Mauro Rebusoni, he played in the French third tier. He's also played in Italy, so again, has that experience there. So we'll see where that goes in terms of that. But two Argentinian guys that are joining a basically Argentinian South American team. All right, back row position, one that I think you could get pretty excited for. Benjamin Bonasso is returning, Thomas Caceres is returning, Chase Shore Haskin is returning, and then now through the dispersal draft, you add Marquez Falatau and Ronan Foley to the mix. I love the Ronan Foley pickup there. We've always been high on him here on the Fantasy Ruckers show, especially from a fantasy sense. This is a pretty solid back row room.
Yeah, no, I mean it's yeah, we love to see it. I think I'm looking forward to see Ronan Foley come back and just kind of be the guy here. We'll see, but also, I mean, Benji Bonasso, he's always a great guy to have on your squad. So I'm
Mhm.
really looking forward to see what his impact is.
The big one that we don't see the returning of here in the back row room is Manuel Ardeo. He was the highest scoring back row player
Yeah.
at 137.3 fantasy points. But you can expect, if we're assuming that Ardeo is not returning, that Foley can really step into that position and maybe make up for that fantasy production. Benjamin Bonasso, 111.9 fantasy points there. And then Thomas Caceres, a guy that I'm trying to look here. Had a lot of second row appearances there, was pretty
Yeah.
solid, 66.2 fantasy points. So we'll see kind of where he enters the mix there.
Yeah, no, I mean he was a solid guy. I think he missed a lot of time, I think with a red card or yellow cards. I know he was a guy that I had on my squad. So you're kind of hoping that he gets that second row eligibility because I think that works in his favor a bit more.
All right, scrum half position, team captain Thomas Kubeli, one of the, I believe, first signings, right, for this Miami, or if not the first signing for this Miami
The
Sharks team.
first. Yep.
The first, Thomas Kubeli, 37.2 fantasy points last year. Never really reached expectation when it came to fantasy production, but we'll see whether or not in his second year they'll be able to do anything different. And he joins Damian Morley, who also returns for the scrum half room.
Yeah, I mean, Kubeli didn't have that much of an impact last year. We saw so much of Inciarte at nine. So it'll be really interesting to see what type of impact Kubeli can have. I don't see him having, like, I would look at Connor Buckley as a better fantasy option than Kubeli here,
Mhm.
simply just because of past history and kind of the opportunity that Buckley has had with this Old Glory DC team.
Cabelli missing some time between round 7 and round 10.
Yeah,
Came
I
on
think
as
injury. Yeah.
reserve in round 11. So again, that probably put a damper into his fantasy production. But again, never scoring higher than 11 fantasy points, which I guess is not atypical of a nine. But then again, a lot of his other productions were around that 1 to 2 point mark, which is something you want maybe a little bit more upside from the nine that you're having. All right, fly half position for this Miami Sharks team. Santiago Videla returns, Shane O'Leary returns, and then you're adding Martin Elias, which I do like that signing of through the dispersal draft. A fly half room that's pretty solid here. Santiago Videla, 154.4 fantasy points last year. Started out as a back three player, but then really came on as a 10 towards the end of the year. I think was one of the top pickups of the season last year. We don't see the return of Philippe Echeverry, so it looks like it is Santiago Videla's position to lose here heading into this year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we really need to talk about Shane O'Leary. That guy came on for a few games and stunk. Uh, San Diego Videla. I mean, it'll be interesting to see who starts. Like, I don't. If you can look it up, right? I don't know if Videla had a couple games starting at 15. I
No
want to
games
say
at
that
15.
no games at 15, but when he did come in and play 10, he was stellar for this team. And Martin
Mm-hmm.
Elias, we've seen what he's done at the Dallas Jackals. So it'll be really interesting to see the combo here. I think Videla probably has that starting job to lose. But I'm sure we'll see a plenty of Martin Elias in this lineup.
Yeah. Yeah, Martin Elias last year was electric for the Dallas Jackals, 88.7 fantasy points. He started every game at 10. I mean, he 11 and 14 were the starts for Videla. So I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibilities that maybe we see a shift to the back three in that multi-purpose utility role. We'll get into the back three positions there. The reason why I say that and why I kind of see where you're going with it, Maddie, is because I think we still are lacking some of the players that maybe are needed. They're in that back three position, so there's the space for someone who has that extra experience like Videla to hop in there. So we'll see. But let's hop onto the centers now. This is also a pretty solid room, but they got Matthias Orlando, Giuseppe Detroit, Thomas Inciarte, Thomas Kubia, who they acquired in the dispersal draft, and they add return Josh McAdam as well. A deep center room that has talent there.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a lot of familiar faces. Like Inciarte Kubia, we saw what Kubia can do for that Dallas
Hmm.
Jackals side. I think he's a great addition here. And you add that on with Matias Orlando, who came in kind of halfway, if I'm remembering correctly, for this team. So it'd be nice to see them kind of have these stars at the beginning of the year.
Hmm.
So it's good. Yeah, I'm really interested to see how the center room works. I think, what's it called? What's his name? Um,
Nick
why is
Gregg.
it? No, I mean, yes, Nick Gregor. I was talking about the reporting guy, but somebody on Twitter was basically saying that this team could basically have an all Argentine back line if they wanted to, which is sweet. I would love to see it. Whether they can do that in the confines of the domestic versus international player thing, we'll have to see.
Yeah. The reason why I bring up Nick Gregg is he's probably the biggest name that's omitted on this list
Yeah,
that we
but I
haven't heard
don't.
of.
I'm not too worried. Like you add Kadia, I don't think the center room's missing too much here without Nick Gregg, and I don't
Yeah.
see them adding too many centers on top of what they've already had. Uh, so yeah, for me, I mean, I would watch out for Kadia here. I think Kadia is going to have a really good year.
So Nick Gregg had around 140 fantasy points. I think to say that Kubia will step in that role is pretty adequate. I mean, look at these performances towards the tail end of the year. You got from rounds 10 when he had made his first appearance with the Dallas Jackals through round 18. 13.1, 16.1, 15.2, 14.1, 14.8, 18.3, scoring 4 tries in those 6 games. Man, Kubia might be one of those guys that you're just like, you look back and you're like, you know what? He's probably going to be one of those top tier centers here who joins a pretty fun Miami Sharks team.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, lastly here for the Miami Sharks, the back three. This is where we say they may are lacking a little bit of depth here. You have the returnings of Marcos Young, who we saw what he can do. Connor Burns comes back with the team, and then they signed Marcos Elisagare. Elisagare.
You're gonna have to start
Elisagare.
learning. I don't
Gotta
know,
start
but
learning
you're gonna
these
have to
names. It's
start
great.
learning. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's not much to talk about with Marcus Young, Connor Burns. We saw Connor Burns kind of his stint with Utah. We know that he's had time with Miami. Marcos Young, like he's a quality player, but probably the most one to talk about is Marcos Elizagari, right? Like I think that's the one that we got to talk about. He's an Argentine Sevens international. He's going to come in and provide a lot of spark, I think. This isn't the first time that we've seen former Sevens players come into this kind of either
Mhm.
this the Miami Sharks or the Dallas Jackal sides. So I'm looking forward to it. I think he's a guy to watch. And he's a guy who might find success here, especially depending on who else they sign. Like if he's a clear cut number one in their back three and he's starting every game, I think he's
Mhm.
going to get a lot of opportunity with just the way that this Miami Sharks team plays.
I think a lot of promise for this Miami Sharks squad. I mean,
Well,
they obviously a disappointing season last year with where they finished in Major League Rugby, but I do think that this team is going to make improvements heading into this year based on some of the guys that will be coming into their team this year.
yeah,
It just I have a good feeling about this squad. And I think that a better season here for the 2025 year is in the books here for this Shark squad. You agree?
uh, yeah. I mean, everybody makes the playoffs in this one, so
Yeah.
basically, it's pretty hard to miss it.
Yeah, we'll see. All right. Now moving on to the second last team we're going to go through, and that is the Chicago Hounds. You can kind of throw this into the mix with NOLA Gold, who are still waiting on, I think, quite a lot
I
of
mean, Fawcett's coming back,
signings for this squad. Pardon?
surely. Fawcett's surely coming back, right?
Yeah, right. I would assume so, but yeah, there's not many signings that we've heard so far. I think they've announced all their new signings. The returning players we haven't heard much of. We do have confirmed departures from this squad. Obviously the big one being Billy Meeks, who joins the drawing a
LA
blank here.
Bellends.
LA, that Rugby LA, who goes in there. They lost Dave Kearney, Ben Landry, Nick McCarthy, we mentioned, Luke Hardy, who we just talked about, and Fred Apulu. Right now, no official announcements from the front row position. Again, to what Maddie's point is, we can assume that Dylan Fawcett will most likely be back with this team. If he is, he will be the de facto hooker for this team and probably for the most of fantasy MLR. So we'll wait and see in terms of any more confirmed front row signings. Second row signings, they only have announced a new player in Hamish Bain. Do you know anything about Hamish Bain?
Yeah, I mean, he's played for Glasgow. I think he's had some time with Scotland as well. I believe it's Hamish Bain, but to
Hamish.
each their own, tomato, tomato.
No,
I
no,
think
no, you're right. You're right.
he should bring a lot of experience to this side. And I think he'll be a second row that we're definitely going to look at. Like, I mean, we look at second row, like you're really trying to find quality here, and he might be a guy that's just gonna provide some of that quality for both Chicago Hounds and fantasy wise.
I think I just gotta stop trying so hard with these names. It's like
Yeah,
again, I
it's
think we
just a
mentioned
name.
on the
It's
I think
just a
we
name.
mentioned it. I think we mentioned it before. It's like the woman that was announcing the names on like like the graduation for the university, and then the most simplest names like Ryan, like Rianne, just really trying too hard.
Yep.
I
It's
gotta
like,
keep it more low
yep,
key. All right, we'll start
exactly.
off with this. Back row position. Matt Awaru. I think I did that pretty good. New signing for the Chicago Hounds. You're entering his back row room. Joins Lucas Rumble and Luke White, who are both confirmed to return. We know what Lucas Rumble can do, or what we've seen with him do in the past, especially with the Arrows. Kind of fell short of expectation. Didn't really find himself in the starting lineup consistently for the Chicago Hounds this year. We knew he was a breakdown baller when it comes to being able to get steals and things like that. We'll see if maybe he can carve himself a little bit more of a prominent role. But three guys here that are pretty solid here for Chicago.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I think you're hoping here for a little bit more from this squad. You're just hoping for a guy that's really like Lucas Rumble, great at breakdown, but we saw that he didn't have necessarily the fancy impact that we want. But you're hoping for a guy, Luke White's definitely great, but you're hoping that they add a power ball carrier to this squad so that you can kind of get a piece of this back row.
Their top scoring back row players last year, McLean Jones, Mason
Yeah,
Flesh, two guys that we haven't seen both breaking the 100-point mark. If Lucas Rumble ends up being the starter here, he only started 6 games last year. A lot of the other times coming off the bench. Does he easily replace that fantasy production and does he become fantasy relevant here for 2025? Because again, we've seen what he's been able to do before, especially when he played on the Arrows when it comes to tackle numbers and breakdown steals. Do you see a world where if Lucas Rumble is the Chicago Hounds starting 7 or 6, he is a guy that's going to be on fantasy rosters that is making a difference?
I don't know. It depends. I mean, I don't think so, uh, but he could prove us wrong, and depending on how many breakdowns he's getting into and how well, I think a lot of his work depends on how well the Chicago Hounds are doing too.
Sure. Sure. All right. Scrum half position, Mitch Short. Only new signing that we got there. Anything to say about Mitch Short?
Guy out of Australia. I think he's had a stint with the Waratahs. Uh, I think he'll be a really nice upgrade for them. I know Nick McCarthy. He's a great player and he retired, so I'm not going to slander his name after he's retired. But he kind of left a little bit to be desired on the Chicago Hounds team. I think Mitch Short will come in and provide a bit of spark in that 9 position.
Fly half now. Tim Swiel is joining the
Huge
team,
upgrade.
which is yeah, we know what the Chicago Hounds went through last year in terms of finding themselves wanting at the 10 position. They obviously went through the Billy Meeks experiment that didn't go so well for those first 5 weeks. We haven't heard anything about Adrian Carls, who kind of stepped into that role. They
No
had Luke
need.
Hardy. He's no gone there, but Tim
No
Swiel is
need.
going to be the guy now.
Yeah, no need. I mean, look, he's had time with Harlequins, he's had time with Stormers, Sharks, the Saracens. This guy has been around. He's played in Japan, and once you play in Japan as an international, you know that you've kind of made it. And he'll be a great addition. I think every time we talked last year, this is the one position that the Chicago Hounds lacked consistency, lacked a star in, and now they've got
Mhm.
one. They've got Tim Swiel, and I think he's going to help lift this backline to another level. However, like you said, Rye, they lost a lot in the centers, and they lost, I think, a lot potentially in the back three, depending on Adrian and Carl's statuses too.
Yeah, so let's go to that center room. Right now, they have announced the returning of Bryce Campbell, and they have added Noah Flesh, and Ollie Devoto, but they
Which,
are
by the
losing
way,
Billy.
if
Yep,
Noah Flesh is here, I'm assuming Mason Flesh is also coming into this
sure,
squad.
sure. But to your point, a lot of departures here. Billy Meeks obviously gone. We haven't heard anything about Mark O'Keefe yet. Those were kind of their two main guys. It is good to see Bryce Campbell back in that spot,
Yeah,
but they've kind of now
but
turned their what they had at fly half. They have that covered, but they're kind of looking for that 13 to kind of step in here, or excuse me, the 12 or 13, depending on where they put Bryce Campbell.
yeah, but look, I'm not too disappointed. Like the addition of Ollie Devoto, a guy who's played over 100 casts for Exeter, like you're not too disappointed here. You're bringing in a
Mhm.
quality guy to replace a quality guy that's left. Uh, and I'm excited to see. I think Ollie Devoto is definitely a guy that you want to look out for. Like, there's going to be some sort of connection between Swiel and Ollie Devoto. Maybe that's just presumptive of me to assume that English players are just going to play well together. But I think Ollie Devoto is a guy to watch both MLR season wise, but definitely fantasy wise too.
And then onto their back three, we have the returning of Noah Brown and Michael Hand. They've
Big
added Ben
boy.
Pollock. So we have a lot of missing names here still. Obviously, Adrian Carlos, like we mentioned, had time at the 15 position.
Julian
I haven't heard anything
Dominguez
from him. Julian Dominguez, Nate Oxberger, who has been a fantasy monster in years in the past. We talked about the departure of Dave Kearney, who again wasn't necessarily that fantasy relevant anyways, but was our
is
what's
Jackie
it called?
Moon.
Jackie Moon, who is part owner of the Hounds. I think I'm wanting for more here in this back three for the Hounds.
Yeah, for sure. I think we'll be waiting. I'm sure. I mean, we'll see with Nate Augsburger. I'm sure Julian Dominguez is back, but only time will tell.
Noah Brown's an exciting one though. I mean, he kind of came up
Noah
here. There
Brown's
have been
exciting,
times
yeah.
where
I mean, it
round
depends on who else comes in. Like if he's starting,
sure.
he's exciting. If he's not, then if you look at that other outs, the rest of the back three, then you're looking at a pretty tough starting lineup to crack.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he's definitely a good streaming option, potentially a guy that you're going to want to draft and have in your squad just with the flash kind of great performances he had last year.
Yeah, round five performance, 32.6 fantasy points, one of our
Yeah,
best all year. Two tries, 142 meters gained, 13 tackles, and two breakdown steals. Yeah. So I mean, again, I think we're kind of in the same spot with the NOLA Gold with this in terms of just not knowing kind of what their full team will look like. There's so many positions to be filled. But I think there are things here as a Chicago Hounds fan, if you are cheering for this team heading into this year, that you can be excited for, like Tim Swiel, and see that there is going to be a fresh look here for the Chicago Hounds heading into 25.
yeah, for sure.
All right, let's go to the last team here, the New England Free Jacks, who
Yeah.
basically are the same New England Free Jacks, but just get a little bit better here. Um, it's incredible how consistent this team is and stable this team is in terms of just a top tier franchise in this league and kind of the staple of what teams are looking for, and that's why they've won back-to-back championships. But look at the list of their names. This is probably one of the teams that have been most filled out for the longest amount of time. Not to say that other teams are just waiting to make these announcements, but just the way they do it and the way that they've gone about their business has always been, at least as a fantasy guy, helpful on our end to know this stuff beforehand and with lots of notice with active social media and things like that. So we'll go into the front row position. Interesting here. Caleb Geiger, Kyle Sakara, Andrew Quattrin, Malachi Halanatai, Foster Dewitt, or Foster DeWitt, Tavita Soul, and Cole Keith all coming back to the New England Free Jacks. Then they add Kyle Steves from the dispersal draft and then sign two guys in Connell McInerney,
All right.
McNerney,
Guess
sure,
what
and
country he's from?
probably Ireland, I would
Yeah,
guess. And
Australia.
oh, we went over this. We went over this last show with Vandy. Australia. Okay, Connell McNerney, and then Joan
Jeez.
Corey is also joining the New England Free Jacks. So a staple, a deep room there. Quattrin is probably the guy for now that you're looking at, but I'm excited to see what Connell is able to do here.
Hey,
We'll
it's
see.
Australian international, so we'll see. But I think, when you have a guy like Quattrin who's proven to be a staple for your team and, he adds to that domestic spot, I think he's going to be a good start and a solid start for them.
Yeah, Quattrin, if I pull up the numbers here, again, one of the top front row players from last season, 122.9 fantasy points. Friend of the show, we had him on the top scoring hooker, our front row player in all of fantasy MLR. If you want to look at his interview that we talked with him not too bad long ago, go check that out on our channel. Really, really good stuff from Andrew Quattrin. And then, yeah, we'll see what kind of the impact is coming here with some of the other guys. Second row position. Jackson Thieves returning, Josh Larson returning, Connor Keys returning. So all staple guys, obviously Josh Larson being the captain for the New England Free Jacks, and then they add Sam Caird into this mix. Another second row room that is deep, got talent, going to be solid.
Yeah, got not much more to add on top of that.
Josh Larson is probably a guy that will definitely be kind of looked at as a guy that's drafted second row
Yeah,
position, tackle machine. Um, just based on the threshold of a second rose produced for you, he's probably a guy that will be on the radar, at least out of this room here. Then we get to the back row. And man, like one of the best back row rooms outside out of probably Houston that you'd throw in there, maybe, with the likes of Sam Tuifua and Ronan Murphy. But you go down the list here. Jed Melvin, Vian Conradi, Joe Johnson, Piers Von Dadelson, Ethan Fryer, all returning for the New England Free Jacks. And then they add the monster that is Yero Gomez Vara, who is electric for the Dallas Jackals. And this is just going to be a room that's very, very deep. Obviously, last year they were dealing with injury at this position, especially with the injury to Vian Conradi. I think they were dealing stuff with Jed Melvin as well. So it can only help to add guys like Yero Gomez Vara. But this is a back row room that's there's so much talent here.
Yeah, I mean, look, when they had all those injuries last year and they bring in guys like Ethan Fryer, they bring in guys like Jed Melvin to come and cover. Uh, these guys stepped up and they showed that they're absolute quality players. Jed Melvin is going to be starting for this team. I think this back row room is one of those positions, along with a couple others that we can look at to say, I have no clue who's starting. And that's a problem with fantasy. That's a
Yeah.
problem with fantasy, and it's going to take time to really understand. I think there's a couple guys where you know the likes of Ian Conradi is going to be there, the likes of Gerald Gomez Vara is going to be there, and you think about Jed Melvin is probably going to be the guy there on the other side, but really you can slot in Ethan Fryer, you can slot in Joe Johnson, and you won't have that too much of a dip.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. Definitely, obviously, the injury has something to go into it, but the upside of Vian Conradi that was heading into last season, he was drafted in the first round. Probably
Yeah.
not the same heading into this year, but
Oh,
we'll see where
yeah.
that kind of
I
lands.
think
All
Jed
right.
Melvin needs to be on teams, but yeah.
No, no, 100%, I agree. But I guess just with how deep this room is, I think what we saw with Vian Conradi, more so, not so much on Jed Melvin, that
Yeah.
they're just, I think there's going to be a little bit more pause as spending top tier draft capital on any of these guys when it comes to maybe your first 2 or 3 rounds. All right, come to scrum half position. Oscar Lennon, Cam Nordley Calameti, and of course, John Poland, all returning here. The same scrum half room we've had for this team for quite some time. John Poland obviously dealing with that injury last year. Cam Nordley Calameti coming in. But I think John Poland will slot himself right back up there in terms of top tier nines here. Cam Nordley Calameti did a good job of stepping in there and filling in that role. Oscar Lennon, solid, obviously, but John Poland is kind of the guy that I know that they count on a lot here.
Yeah, I mean, another packed from out from Oscar Lennon came in and played well. But John Poland here is a clear starter, I think. You shouldn't be afraid to draft him for sure with a little bit of higher value for a nine.
Fly half position, Jason Potros returning. I mean, what else do we say about it? He's been one of the top tier, if not the top tier fly half in fantasy circles for a long time here.
Yep,
210.6 fantasy points. There's really nothing else to be said. He's coming back to do it all again.
yep, for sure.
Okay, and then going into the center room, you had the returning of Wayne Vanderbank, Ben Lesage, and Leroux Milan. So you got that core again, and you're adding Falatoy Penny and Jack Reeves. I'd expect it's probably a similar situation to what we had last year. The question is going to be, I think, with the center room is obviously with Leroux Milan coming off the injury in the World Cup, the question of will he return to what we've seen with Leroux Milan? Is that going to be coming back? And with what Wayne
Uh,
Vanderbank did last year, where do they slot now? Is there a hit to Wayne Vanderbank's ceiling to what we saw last year? Obviously, there's going to be some sort of regression to the mean here, but how much is Leroux Milan going to take that step up? I guess.
I mean, I don't. To me, the question is who the heck is going to start here. I mean, you're looking at the three guys that are returning, and you look at a guy like Jack Reeves, American eligible, but played, has played well for Gloucester, like a guy who goes over and plays well in the Premiership. That guy
Yeah.
has a spot in your starting lineup. So I'm not sure what the starting looks like here. Penny is also not a guy to scoff at. Like he played well in the NPC Bunnies Cup and is a young man. So we'll have to see here. I'm truly not sure. Like this, when I was talking about position rooms that are packed, this is one of them, and I'm just trying to figure out what this means fantasy wise because you're only going to have three centers in your lineup. Um, yeah,
And only two of them will be relevant from a fantasy sense because only two of them will
exactly,
start, obviously.
exactly.
So, I mean, we'll see. Again, I think this is a great parallel to on the field. This is where fantasy MLR success and Major League Rugby success kind of tapers off and there's that fork in the road. Obviously, as a New England Free Jacks fan, you're very excited about this because I think especially with all the injury that you dealt with last year, you're happy to see this depth and you're happy to see guys of this caliber being able to step in this role. And it's not a bad thing to have these guys kind of waiting in the ranks there to kind of step into those roles when they are needed. From a fantasy sense, to what Matthew's been kind of punching on this whole episode is that it's a headache to try to figure out and spend the draft capital on some of these guys, knowing that they could start one week and then not start the next week, and that really hurts you because roster spots are at a premium, especially when you're drafting some of these guys high. So we'll wait and see. Last thing here to wrap up this preseason warm up of the Eastern Conference, back three of the New England Free Jacks. Isaac Olson, Killian Coughlin, and Paul Belicana all returning for the New England Free Jacks. And then you got some new names here. Josiah Mora, Brock Webster, and Simon Peter Toliafoa is all returning here, or is all signing with them. Obviously, Brock Webster is a familiar name, played with the Arrows. He's coming to the Free Jacks. Then you got two new signings in Josiah Mora and Simon Peter Toliafoa. Interesting stuff here, because obviously the big name here that they haven't announced is the return of Reese McDonald. So interesting there, especially with all like the other returnings that they've announced so far. Maybe there's still something still in the works, but you can now start thinking about whether or not this is something that they have to look at. The departure of Reese McDonald, which would be a big departure. Obviously, Mitch Wilson has moved on. The only really returning player that we know of right now that is a staple of this back three that we've seen in the past is Paula Belicana. And Matthew, having him on your fantasy team last year, he wasn't necessarily the most fantasy productive at times, or what you were hoping to get out of him. So who steps in these roles? If we're with the names that we see now, what does this starting back three look like? And is it going to be as effective as we've seen in the past with this Free Jacks back three?
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I think we should see a lot of Toliafoa. I think it will be interesting to see where Brock Webster and Josiah Moore come in as domestic players technically. I'm really looking forward to see Josiah Moore play in an MLR setting. I mean, he's my boy. Looking forward to probably having him on the show in the future. So yeah, I mean, Balakane is going to be a guy there. I think you're really looking for. You have Isaac Olson, but I think you're really looking for that Reese McDonald replacement at this time. Like, I don't think they're the same team without that guy in the back three.
Yeah. And that's the biggest question mark here again. What's concerning here is that they've announced all these returning players, and Reese has not been one of them. As I know of, I haven't seen him sign anywhere elsewhere. So the optimism there that he could return is still there, but yeah, not too sure. And I think the dynamic of this team changes drastically with the departure of Reese McDonald. So we'll have to see. Overall thoughts, though, the New England Free Jacks, Matty. I mean, it seems like they are, again, the team to beat here coming into this 2025 year.
I mean, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And they've only added guys. And I think the biggest concern for us is really that Reese McDonald lack of announcement, because I think, again, like we said, they're a completely different team without Reese McDonald. And he was a big part of their success the past couple of years.
Yeah, no question. All right, well, we've gone through it, Maddie. We've gone through the Western Conference last episode. We've gone through the Eastern Conference. It's just getting me more and more excited here for this upcoming fantasy MLR year. Going forward now, we're going to continue to keep everyone updated with the new signings that do come in. Expect a lot of those to be coming in, but now it's all about preseason prep, and we're going to start going through some rankings. We're going to go through some power rankings in terms of teams, and going through some of these other position by position fantasy relevant type stuff to get you all prepared for this upcoming 2025 year. So it should be a lot of fun. I won't hit the button, Maddie. I will not hit the Supreme Commissioner Yi update because I don't think it warrants one here. But I will say, keep an eye out. I've had meetings with the Fantasy Ruckers team. We are getting things rolling. Registration for the upcoming Fantasy MLR year will begin at the start of 2025. We're in the works of revamping some stuff, adding some stuff. It's going to be a really, really cool year. And we can't wait for the people to get to experience Fantasy MLR once again. So keep an eye out at the Fantasy Ruckers. That'll all come out here in the new year. There'll be other information coming out within the next couple of weeks. But it should be good. It's getting me pretty excited here for the upcoming Fantasy MLR season.
Ain't that the truth? And I don't think we'll see the people till the new year. So, happy holidays, happy new year.
We shall see. Should be good. And Matt, hey, good luck in that championship, fantasy football championship. You've won it here in Fantasy MLR. You're still waiting for that fantasy football. We'll see what you get that done.
Yeah, hey, only time will tell.
All right. Well, for Matt Yee, for Devin Vandy Vanderpool, I am Ryan Yee, and we'll see you again here on the Fantasy Ruckers Show.
Happy holidays.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.